Hello again, and welcome to this second video in my DioField Chronicle Ultimate Skill Breakdown series, where I go through every single skill in the game, detailing how they work and some of the best ways I've found to use them. This time we are talking about Magicker skills. These skills are some of my absolute favorites in the game, providing us with a great deal of control, healing, and AoE damage. Also, side note, I realized I should have mentioned this in the Soldier class breakdown, but please note that the EP costs and cooldown times I mention in these videos are the base values before modifiers from items or character abilities. So with that said, let's jump into the Magicker skills. So the first skill on the Magicker skill tree is Convalescent Circle, which is an excellent AoE healing skill. It lasts for 10 seconds and heals those within range up to 5 times, and it also has the added benefit of reviving down to characters as well. At level 2, it heals for more, at level 3, its AoE increases, and at level 4, it bestows Might, giving all affected characters bonus damage for a time. This skill can bring your party back to full health or very near. The downside is that your party has to stay within the circle to receive healing, so they cannot advance and heal at the same time, and it prevents your Magicker from using any other skills for 20 seconds. I've found it best to use this skill when needed between engagements during a mission, provided you have the time to spare, and only when your whole party needs healing. Otherwise, if you have them equipped, you're better off using Hurried Heal or Heal, as those have much shorter cooldown times. Moving up the left side of the tree now, which corresponds to staff skills, we have Meteor Fall. Meteor Fall is an AoE attack that has a large target area, making it effective even against spread out enemies. It gets much better once upgraded, as the first upgrade gives burn to those hit with it, which does damage over time. The second upgrade increases its damage, and the last expands its AoE even more. Don't underestimate the power of damage over time from burn. It can help quite a bit, especially against tankier foes, and then if you pair this skill with one that does more damage to targets with status effects, you can pull off some pretty powerful combos. The downside to this skill is that it is quite expensive in both EP and cooldown time, which makes it less useful than some other skills. Next is probably my favorite skill after Assassination and Shadow Step from the Soldier class, Frostbind. If you are playing a control style Magicker and not using this, you need to start right away. Frostbind is the ultimate control spell, and if you watched my OP before Chapter 2 video, you'll know why. This skill inflicts freeze, which is a much better version of stun, as it locks enemies into place for almost as long as the skill's cooldown timer, which is 10 seconds before upgrades. The first upgrade increases the skill's range, the second reduces the cooldown by 2 seconds, and the last expands the area of effect. No, this skill doesn't do any damage, but it can essentially lock down an entire group of enemies indefinitely. It's great to hold off a second group while your party finishes off a first, or to prevent your party from taking any damage while wailing on your foes with impunity. Furthermore, since freeze is a status effect, you can pair this with something like Shadow Step or Avatar Rush and do major damage to an enemy or enemies. Frostbind is also relatively cheap at only 20 EP per use. Next on the list we have Pandemic. Pandemic is an AoE attack skill that takes a status effect from one affected enemy and spreads it to all other affected enemies. Its damage alone isn't that great, but once upgraded, it can be devastating in certain situations. The first upgrade reduces its EP cost by 5 down to 20, and the second allows it to deal 15% more damage per status effect on the enemy, and the last expands its area of effect. This second upgrade, though, is where the skill's power comes from. If you can get enemies affected with several status effects and then use this on them, it can do some pretty decent damage. But this can be hard to set up. But what isn't hard is hitting that like button if you're enjoying this video so far. I'd really appreciate it, as this tells YouTube to show my content to more people. So thank you, and I appreciate it. Moving on now to... Magical Force is the Magicker's ultimate skill, as I call it. It does good damage over a wide area and does extra damage to the Soldier class. Its upgrades provide it with increased damage, range, and the Wither status effect. Wither increases damage taken by those afflicted with it. This skill can be great for weakening the tanky enemy soldiers, though it does come at the cost of 35 EP and a 20-second cooldown. Next up is Hurried Heal. This is a great early healing skill with low cost and a short cooldown. It heals 30% of a unit's HP, and once upgraded to level 1, it also removes status effects. The next two upgrades reduce its cooldown time and EP cost. The last skill on this side of the tree is Ignition. At first, I didn't really like this one, but once I upgraded it to level 1 and used it a few times, I realized just how powerful it was. Ignition grants rapidity to your units, which increases their movement speed, attack speed, and reduces their cooldowns. Once upgraded to level 1, it provides the Might buff as well, increasing attack power. The next two upgrades reduce its EP cost and expand its area of effect. This skill is actually extremely powerful because when your whole party is affected by it, they can mow through most enemies extremely fast with extra damage, even without using skills. This is a buff you should try to have up constantly, since it also helps you traverse the map faster and achieve those timed objectives. And one more cool side note is that your units don't have to be in the AoE of the buff when you use it, as it stays on the ground for a while, and if they simply walk through it, they still receive the buff. Moving on now to the right side of the tree, which has the wand skills. We first come to Heal. Heal is essentially an upgraded version of Hurried Heal. It heals for 50% of a unit's health rather than 30, and has a shorter cooldown. At level 1, it also gives Tenacity, increasing its target's defenses. At level 2, its cooldown is reduced, and at level 3, it heals an additional 20%, which equates to healing for 60% of the target's full health. Next up, we have Flame Wisp. This skill creates a fireball that orbits around one of your units and does damage to every enemy it hits, potentially inflicting the burn status. Its upgrades reduce its EP cost, increase its range, and extend the fireball's duration. Personally, I did not use this skill much, but it could be useful when used in conjunction with a tank character, as they could put up shield wall and have this fireball whipping around and doing damage to all the enemies gathered around. So if you like using a tank, this would pair well with their skill set, though it does have a little higher cost at 30 EP and a 10-second cooldown. Ice Missile I did use for a while. This one creates a block of ice that orbits one of your units and fires ice arrows every time the unit attacks, adding a little extra damage. Its real advantage, however, is in its chance to freeze targets. If you don't have Frostbind equipped, Ice Missile can be a decent substitute if you use it on multiple party members. It has a short cooldown and low cost, so it can be used easily in quick succession. Its first two upgrades reduce its cooldown time and EP cost, and the last increases its chance of freezing enemies. Next is Lightning Rod. This skill is actually pretty cool and useful, as it can do damage over an area multiple times and has a chance to stun every enemy that is hit by it. It's really useful for bosses once you have them standing still fighting your melee characters. Its upgrades reduce its EP cost, extend its duration, and give increased damage to its caster during the cooldown period. Sanctuary is another healing skill that creates a restorative area on the ground that restores HP bits at a time to any allies within it. Its upgrades increase its healing amount, give Tenacity to those healed by it, which is a defense boost, and expands its area of effect. This skill is better in theory than in practice though, as you can get much quicker and efficient healing out of Hurried Heal or Heal, but the Tenacity buff does make it more useful if just to grant the buff. Finally, for the wand skills, we have Frenzied Soul. I like this skill as it does both good damage in a large area and returns some of that damage as healing to allies in that same area. The more enemies you hit, the more healing it does. In addition, at level 3, it buffs your units with Might, giving them increased attack damage. The first level increases the healing amount, and the second increases the area of effect. That covers all the Magicker skills in the game. Many of these can pair very well with skills from other classes, which makes them exceptionally powerful. I am thinking about doing a video on some of the most powerful combos at some point, where you'll be able to see just what I mean. But for now, please remember to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't. We're shooting for 1,000 subs by the end of November. It's a high goal, but I think we can do it. So I'm asking you to share some of my videos and tell your friends who might be interested in the channel to come and check it out. I'd appreciate it so much if you would. If you want to watch another one of my videos, you can click this one here, and as always, thank you for watching, and keep on gaming.